Welcome to After Point C. My name is Joni Jones, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about how your divorce proceedings and how you respond can impact your child, even to the point where it becomes traumatic for them. So when we look at the Point C video, what we're seeing is the child is starting out very sweet, and then there comes some anger responses. Then we're seeing some learned behavior where their own problem solving becomes with the courts, hiring attorneys, and not really talking things out. And then we see a balloon and the child in the balloon, and the balloon begins to float away. And when that balloon begins to float away, let's think about that for a moment. If we release a balloon, where does it go? What do we know? What happens to that balloon? When does it land? Does it pop? So think about your child, because every child responds differently. And like I said, your behaviors and the way that we see the child being pulled on to sides and they get all confused and they lose their security, this can become very traumatic for a person. And as a child, it can be carried through into adulthood. So as a child, we can see some behavioral changes. You know, some children will become very aggressive, where other people, they might become very withdrawn. We might see changes in their school performances or difficulty in concentrating. Some of them even start to act out. We start to see somatic responses, and somatic responses are those physical symptoms that are real. You can get a headache, a stomach ache, can really get sick. The only difference is it's caused by an underlying anxiety, and that's how it's treated, by managing the underlying anxiety. And then we look at some emotional responses. And one of the things that I like to talk about is guilt versus shame. Do you know the difference? Guilt is when a person feels like they did something wrong. Shame is when that person feels they are the something wrong. And that's the difference. Other responses that we can see is maybe an underlying fear, sadness. Again, I talked about the anger responses. Some children start to begin having self-esteem struggles. They have problems with trusting and developing dysfunctional relationships. And one of the things that I see as a mental health professional is that as children get older and they become sexually active, they misinterpret the act of sex for love. And that causes a whole nother slew of problems. Getting back to the children, we might see some developmental delays, and that could be cognitive, it can be social, it can be emotional. But think about the trauma, because the trauma can produce flashbacks, sleep disturbances, eating disturbances, and then we see ineffective coping. And many times with that ineffective coping, again, the development of unhealthy relationships, some people go to gangs because they are accepted. They feel good about themselves in that gang relationship. Some start to drink. And if you have that alcoholic, gene within inside you, then we start to see alcoholism. Some start to smoke. Some start to dabble in some drugs, and that can have a whole nother slew of problems in itself. And then we get into the mental health challenges, and I don't know how many of you know, but in the United States, 1 out of 4 people are diagnosed each year with a mental health challenge. Now, that doesn't include the amount of people that aren't diagnosed. And we can see people with the ineffective coping, the mental health challenges. They might start cutting, they might have that depression, the anxiety, and thoughts of suicide. And this becomes very serious. We might see some resentment and separations of family. And you really want to avoid going full circle, I would think, because if you're experiencing that resentment and that separation of family, and your children grow up to have families of their own, you may be the one that is isolated from your grandchildren. They've become separated from you. So when you think of the overall scope of things, when you watch that video and it impacted you at the end, it affects people differently.